The Indian Coast Guard is the fourth branch of the Armed Force of India. Its mission is the protection of India's maritime interests and enforcement of maritime law, with jurisdiction over the territorial waters of India, including its contiguous zone and exclusive economic zone. ICG was formally established on August 18, 1978 as an armed force of the Union by the Coast Guard Act, 1978. It operates under the Ministry of Defence. The Coast Guard works in close cooperation with the Indian Navy, Department of Fisheries, Department of Revenue and the Central and State Police Forces. Mission. The Indian Coast Guard's motto is AAAAA Currency Yen AAAA Currency Florin, which translates from Sanskrit as We Protect. Missions of Indian Coast Guard: safety and protection of artificial islands, offshore terminals and other installations, protection and assistance to fishermen and mariners at sea, preservation and protection of marine ecology and environment including pollution control, assistance to the Department of Customs and other authorities in anti-smuggling operations, law enforcement in territorial as well as international waters, scientific data collection and support, national defense during hostilities, additional responsibilities of the Indian Coast Guard, Offshore Security Coordination Committee. The Director General of Indian Coast Guard is the Chairman of OSCC constituted by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. National Maritime Search and Rescue Coordinating Authority, Director General of the Indian Coast Guard is the NMSERCA for executing coordinating search and rescue missions, lead intelligence agency, for coastal and sea borders, coastal security. Director General of the Indian Coast Guard is the Commander Coastal Command and is responsible for overall coordination between central and state agencies in all matters relating to coastal security. History. The establishment of the Indian Coast Guard was first proposed by the Indian Navy to provide non-military maritime services to the nation. In the 1960s, seaborne smuggling of goods was threatening India's domestic economy. The Indian Customs Department frequently called upon the Indian Navy for assistance with patrol and interception in the anti-smuggling effort. The Nagpur-Tarai Committee was constituted with participation from the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force to study the problem. In August 1971, the committee identified the requirement to patrol India's vast coastline, set up a registry of offshore fishing vessels in order to identify illegal activity, and establish a capable and well-equipped force to intercept vessels engaged in illegal activities. The committee also looked at the number and nature of the equipment, infrastructure and personnel required to provide those services. By 1973, India has started a program to acquire the equipment and started deputing personnel from the Indian Navy for these anti-smuggling and law enforcement tasks, under the provisions of the Maintenance of Internal Security Act. The Indian Navy sensed that the law enforcement nature of these duties diverged from its core mission as a military service. Admiral Surendranath Kohli, then Chief of Naval Staff, hence made a recommendation to the Defence Secretary outlining the need for a separate maritime service to undertake those duties and offering the Navy's assistance in its establishment. On August 31, 1974, the Defence Secretary submitted a note to the Cabinet Secretary proposing Cabinet action on Admiral Kohli's recommendation. As a result, in September 1974, the Indian Cabinet set up the Rustomjee Committee, under the chairmanship of Khusro Farahmorz Rustomjee, with participation from the Navy, the Air Force and the Department of Revenue to examine gaps in security and law enforcement between the roles of the Indian Navy and the central and state police forces. The discovery of oil off Bombay High further emphasized the need for a maritime law enforcement and protection service. The committee submitted its recommendation for the establishment of the Indian Coast Guard under the Ministry of Defence on July 31, 1975. Bureaucratic wrangling followed, with the Cabinet Secretary making a recommendation to place the service under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi overruled the Cabinet Secretary and decided to accept the original recommendation of the Rustomjee Committee to place the service under the Ministry of Defence. An interim Indian Coast Guard came into being on February 1, 1977, equipped with 2 small corvettes and 5 patrol boats transferred from the Navy. The duties and functions of the service were formally defined in the Coast Guard Act, which was passed by India's Parliament on August 18, 1978 and came into immediate effect. Vice Admiral V.A. Kamath of the Indian Navy was appointed the founding Director General. Prime Minister Morarji Desai inspected the Guard of Honour at the service's inauguration. Vice Admiral Kamath proposed a 5-year plan to develop the ICG into a potent force by 1984, but the full potential of this plan was not immediately realized due to an economic resource crunch. One of the historic operational successes of the ICG occurred in October 1999, with the recapture at high seas of a Panamanian-registered Japanese cargo ship, MV Alondra Rainbow, hijacked off Indonesia. Her crew was rescued off Phuket, Thailand. The ship had been repainted as MV Megarama, and was spotted off Kuchai, heading towards Pakistan. She was chased by ICGS Tarabay and Insa Prahara, K-98, of the Indian Navy, and apprehended. It was the first successful prosecution of armed pirates in over a century. The Indian Coast Guard conducts exercises with the other coast guards of the world. In May 2005, the ICG agreed to establish liaison links with Pakistan's Maritime Security Agency. In 2006, the Indian Coast Guard conducted exercises with its Japanese and Korean counterparts. After the 2008 Mumbai attacks, the Indian government initiated a program to expand the ICG force, assets and infrastructure. The force is expected to be tripled between 2010 and 2019 in manpower, vessels and aircraft. Personnel, Coast Guard officers. The officers in the Coast Guard have the same rank structure as the Central Armed Police Forces. The Director General Coast Guard is usually a Vice Admiral rank officer on deputation from the Indian Navy. Officers are appointed in the Coast Guard in one of 4 branches, as either General Duty Officer, Pilot Officer, Technical Officer or Law Officers. Lady officers have 2 branches, that is General Duty Officer or Pilot Officer, and serve on shore establishments, air stations, headquarters. They are not deployed on board Indian Coast Guard ships. General Duty Officers. The command of ships at sea can only be exercised by officers of the General Duty branch. The key functions of a General Duty Officer would be to operate weapons, sensors and different kinds of equipment on board a ship. The safety of the ship and the men would be GD officers' responsibility. All the district commanders and commander of Coast Guard region appointments are exercised by a GD officer of the Indian Coast Guard. GD officers are graduates in science or engineering. Pilot officers are also part of GD branch. A pilot officer gets an opportunity to work at shore air stations along the Indian coasts and also embark ships. ICG operates fixed-wing aircraft for surveillance of the exclusive economic zone. In addition, helicopters are embarked on Coast Guard offshore patrol vessels to provide local surveillance and perform search and rescue mission at sea. Pilot officers are graduates in science or engineering. Technical officers are responsible for operation of advanced technology and sensor systems on board Coast Guard vessels and aircraft, as well as on-shore installations. They also command the maintenance wings of the force. Technical officers are graduates in engineering. Law officers act as legal advisors to their respective commanders. They represent the Indian Coast Guard in legal actions filed by or against the organization. They also perform the duties of trial law officers in Coast Guard courts, convene to try delinquent Coast Guard personnel. The Directorate of Law at Coast Guard Headquarters is headed by a Deputy Inspector General. Enrolled persons in the Coast Guard serve as either a Yantrik or Navik. Yantriks are responsible for operating and maintaining mechanical, electrical or aeronautical equipment and systems on board the Coast Guard vessels and aircraft. Naviks may further serve in the general duty or domestic branches. The general duty Naviks serve as sailors, weapons systems operators, communication specialists, divers, etc. or in specific maritime or aviation support roles. Domestic branch Naviks serve in roles such as stewards, cooks, etc. on board Coast Guard vessels. All personnel are trained in operation of weapons systems in cases of emergency. Training. Currently, Officers of Indian Coast Guard undergo basic military training at the Indian Naval Academy, Yazimala, along with their counterparts of Indian Navy. This helps in the mutual interchange of officers among these two sister services. While the Indian Coast Guard Academy is under construction in Ashikal, Kannur district, Kerala. The sailors of Indian Coast Guard gets trained along with Indian naval sailors at the Indian Naval Training Establishment INS Chikka. All the training undertaken by Indian Coast Guard officers and sailors are the same as those undertaken by Indian naval officers and sailors. Organization: the Indian Coast Guard organization is headed by the Director General, who is located at Coast Guard Headquarters, New Delhi. At CGHQ, he is assisted by 4 Deputy Director Generals of the rank of Inspector General, and other senior officers heading various staff divisions. The current Director General is Vice Admiral Anuragjeet Thaplyal, AVSM. Indian Coast Guard has recently got its first 3-star rank officer Shri Rajendra Singh, Additional Director General, PTM, TM, who has the distinction of being the first regular direct entry officer of the Indian Coast Guard to be promoted to the rank of ADG on January 11, 2013. Additional Director General of Indian Coast Guard is equivalent to Vice Admiral of Indian Navy. The ICG as of now is headed by a naval officer of the rank of Vice Admiral on deputation to the Coast Guard as a direct entry Coast Guard officer is yet to reach the age service to become equivalent to Vice Admiral, as it is the youngest of all the all-armed forces started in the 1970s. 2 of the Director Generals, Director General of Indian Coast Guard Rameshwar Singh DG, PTM, and Director General of Indian Coast Guard Drive Prabhakaran Falleri DG, PTM. TM, were career Coast Guard officers, in the sense that they were Indian Navy officers on permanent secondment to the Indian Coast Guard. DG Rameshwar Singh had spent 20 years in the Indian Navy, before he was seconded permanently to the Indian Coast Guard. His tenure lasted for 6 months, between March 2001 and September 2001. Dr. Prabhakaran Falleri, DG, was commissioned in the Indian Navy in 1969, and permanently seconded to the Coast Guard in 1981. His tenure lasted for 5 months, from February 2006 to August 2006. The Indian Coast Guard operates 5 regions. Each region is headed by an officer of the rank of Inspector General. Each of the regions is further divided into multiple districts, typically covering a coastal state or a union territory. Establishments: by the end of 2012, the Indian Coast Guard is on track to operate 42 Coast Guard stations, 5 Coast Guard air stations, 10 Coast Guard air enclaves, equipment. Surface vessels, ships belonging to the Indian Coast Guard are prefixed ICGS, abbreviation for Indian Coast Guard Ship. Aircraft inventory. The Coast Guard operates a fleet of 38 Dornier Do-228 maritime surveillance aircraft, 9 HAL DHRUV and 19 HAL Chatak utility helicopters. Planning and improvement, see also. Indian Navy, Indian Naval Academy, Indian Coast Guard Academy, Indian Army, Indian Air Force, Military of India, Paramilitary Forces of India, Ministry of Defence. References. www. Indian Coast Guard Nicking Personnel ICG% 20 Uniform PDF, http www.thehindu-businessline-com Coastguard Statteerfart Interceptor Vessel Commissioned Article 4610289 East. Homepage equals true and ref equals WL Home. External links, official website, Ministry of Defence site, Indian Coast Guard Orders 6 Griffon Hovercraft, Indian Coast Guard recruitment website.